The alarms were already screaming when they woke me. Not a soft chime, not a polite request to report to the bridge. A raw, tearing shriek that came through the walls of my quarters and into my bones before my eyes were even open. I fell out of the sleeping frame, hit the floor, cold metal against my palms. 3 heartbeats to remember where I was. I was not on my homeworld. I was not on my own ship. I was strapped into a human vessel called the Ardent, sent here by my own government to watch a species everyone was afraid of and pretend I wasn't. A voice came over the comm, flat and fast. Battle stations. All hands. Contact in 90 seconds. 90 seconds. My government's fleet took 9 minutes just to raise its shields from standby. I pulled on the uniform they'd given me, the one with no rank markings because I held no rank in their chain of command, and ran. The corridor was full of humans moving in one direction, and none of them looked afraid. That was the first wrong thing. Fear is loud in most species I have studied. It shows in the eyes, the gait, the smell. These faces were tight and quiet, like people walking toward a job they didn't love but knew how to do. A woman shoved past me, hair still coming loose from sleep, one boot untied. She didn't stop to fix it. I reached the observation deck above the bridge, the place they'd built for me because I asked to watch and not participate. Glass floor. Full view down into the command well. Captain Nora Bellamy stood at the center of it, one hand braced on the rail, the other holding a mug of something dark that had gone cold hours ago, and that she drank anyway. "Report," she said. 3 hostile signatures, said the tactical officer, a woman named Grace Linden whose fingers moved across her console faster than I could track. Unknown configuration. Weapons hot. Bellamy didn't ask for more information. She said one word. Positions. The ship shuddered, not from an impact, from acceleration, the kind that presses a body into its seat and makes the air in your lungs feel borrowed. I gripped the rail with both hands, and my knuckles ached before I understood why. We were turning toward the threat. Every doctrine I had ever studied said you turn away from 3 unknown hostiles. You retreat. You call for support. You do not fly your one ship at an enemy formation you cannot yet identify. I said this out loud, to no one, because the observation deck had no one else in it, and the words came out smaller than I meant them. We're not doing that. We are not doing that. Below me, Bellamy set down her cold mug on the console with a small, deliberate click, like she was putting a period at the end of a sentence. "Weapons free," she said. "Linden, light them up." The Ardent's forward batteries fired before the enemy ships had even finished their approach vector. I watched 3 streaks of light cross the black and understood, in the space of a single breath, that this was not recklessness. It was arithmetic. They had already done the math. They already knew how this would end. One enemy ship broke apart in a silent flash. No sound reaches a viewport in vacuum, only light. The light was almost beautiful, if you could forget what it meant. A voice crackled over comms, young, male, tight with something that wasn't quite panic. "Direct hit on hull section 4. We've got a breach. Seal it," Bellamy said, already looking away, already moving to the next problem. And only then did I understand that this was the horror of them, not the violence I had prepared for. It was how little it seemed to cost them to keep going. The second enemy ship banked hard, trying to break off, trying to run. Linden's hands moved again. "Belay that," someone breathed, meaning don't let it go, and I realized the voice belonged to me. Nobody heard me. Nobody needed to. The Ardent's engines flared, and the whole deck tilted as the ship pursued, closing the distance the enemy had tried to open, and I pressed my forehead against the cold glass floor and watched a species I had been sent to study choose the harder path every single time it was offered a choice. The second ship died the way the first one had. Quick, quiet, final. The third turned to run in earnest. "Let it go," someone said. A man's voice, deep, tired, coming from a station near the back of the bridge. I would learn later his name was Ethan Cole, and that he was the ship's second in command, and that his voice was the only one on that bridge that ever sounded like it wanted mercy. Bellamy looked at the fleeing ship on her display for exactly 2 seconds. "Let it go," she agreed. I exhaled. I did not know I had been holding my breath until it left me all at once, shaking on the way out. Then Grace Linden's console beeped, a small, ordinary sound that did not belong in a moment like this, and she went still, in a way I had not seen a human go still before. "Captain," she said, "that's not a retreat vector." Bellamy's head turned. "Show me." The display swelled, and even I, with no training in human tactical systems, understood what I was looking at. The third ship wasn't running. It was diving, straight at the Ardent's engine core, on a collision course, weapons dumping every remaining charge into a single overloaded burst. Nobody on that bridge screamed. Nobody froze. Bellamy said 3 words, calm as a woman ordering a meal. "Brace for impact." And I understood, in the half-second before the world went white, that I had been sent to observe humans in battle so that my people would know what to fear. I already knew. I had known for 90 seconds. I just hadn't wanted to believe it yet. The impact never came. What came instead was a sound like the whole ship inhaling, a groan of metal and a flash of light through the glass floor beneath me, and then silence, so complete I thought my hearing had failed. I lay there a long moment before I understood the enemy ship had been destroyed 30 meters short of us. Point defense. 100 tiny guns had chewed the incoming wreck into gravel before it ever touched our hull. Below, on the bridge, nobody cheered. Grace Linden exhaled once, sharp through her nose, and went back to her console like nothing had happened at all. "Damage report," Bellamy said. "Hull breach sealed," said a voice from engineering. "We lost pressure in Section 4. No casualties. Repairs underway." No casualties. She said it the way another person might report the weather. I climbed down from the observation deck on legs that did not feel entirely mine, and found the corridor outside the bridge full of quiet, efficient motion. A man walked past me with a burn across his forearm, skin gone dark and shining, and he was carrying a toolkit in the same hand, using the other to steady it against his hip. I stopped him. I don't know why. Perhaps because my training told me to document injuries, and perhaps because some smaller, less professional part of me needed to understand. "You are hurt," I said. He looked down at his arm, as if I had pointed out a smudge on his shirt. "Yeah," he said. "I'll get it looked at when Fenwick's got a minute." He kept walking. I found Alice Fenwick an hour later in the medical bay, and by then I understood that hour was not an emergency to these people. It was simply how long it took to get to the bottom of a very long list. She was young, younger than I had expected for someone with her title, with steady hands and a voice that dropped low and warm whenever she spoke to a patient, and hard and clipped whenever she spoke to anyone else. I asked her the question I had been turning over since the observation deck. "Are you afraid, during it, the fighting?" She didn't look up from the wound she was cleaning, a long, shallow cut across a young man's shoulder who sat very still and did not make a sound. "Afraid comes after," she said. "During, there's no room for it. You're too busy doing the next thing. And after. When does after happen?" She glanced at the clock on the wall, then back at her work. "After hasn't happened yet," she said. "Ask me in a week." I wrote that down in my notes, in my own language, in the private shorthand I used for things I did not yet understand well enough to explain to my superiors. Fear deferred is not fear absent. It is fear stored. I did not yet know how right that guess would turn out to be. For the next several days, the Ardent limped along its patrol route, while repair crews worked the breach in Section 4, and I spent my time doing what I had been sent to do. I watched. I listened. I sat in the mess hall, uninvited but not unwelcome, and recorded the way these people spoke to each other when they thought no alien eyes were paying particular attention. They joked constantly. About the fight, about their own close calls, about things that should have been unbearable to speak of so soon. A woman from engineering, a broad-shouldered person named Priya who I never learned much else about, described nearly losing a hand in the coolant system with the same tone another person might use to describe a bad parking spot. "Nearly took my fingers off," she said, holding up a hand with a bandage across 2 knuckles. "Would have been a bad week." The table laughed. I did not laugh. I had begun to understand that the laughter was not about the fingers at all. It was about being alive to still have a hand to joke about. I found Ethan Cole one evening standing alone at a viewport near the aft observation lounge, watching the slow wheel of stars outside, and I asked him something I had not planned to ask. "Does it get easier?" I said, the choosing, to fly toward the danger instead of away from it. He was quiet long enough that I thought he might not answer at all. "No," he said finally. "It gets faster. Not easier. There's a difference." "Explain the difference," I said, because I genuinely did not understand, and because some part of me suspected the difference mattered more than anything else I had observed so far. He turned from the window and looked at me properly for the first time since I had come aboard, like he was deciding whether I had earned an honest answer. "Easier would mean it stops costing anything," he said. "It never stops costing anything. You just get faster at paying the price, so it doesn't slow you down when people are depending on you to move." I did not have a response to that. I still don't. Not really, though I have had a long time to think about it since. 3 days later, the Ardent received new orders, and I learned what it meant to watch a species prepare for something they already understood would hurt them, and choose to go anyway. The order was simple on its surface. A convoy of civilian transport ships, 12 vessels carrying refugees from a border conflict my own government had quietly declined to intervene in, was under threat from a raiding fleet 3 times the size of anything the Ardent could reasonably survive engaging alone. Bellamy read the order twice on the bridge display. I watched her face for the fear I had been told humans hid so well. I did not find it. I found something closer to resolve settling into her jaw, the way a foundation settles into ground before a building goes up on top of it.
"Lyndon,"
she said, "get me a firing solution on paper before we even leave dock. I want options before I want optimism." Cole stood at her shoulder, arms crossed, voice low. 3-1 against 12 civilian ships full of people who can't fight back, he said. "That's not a fair fight, Captain." "I know," Bellamy said. "We could call for support. Wait 2 days for the cruiser group to catch up." Bellamy looked at the display a long moment, at the small cluster of transport icons crawling toward a red wall of enemy signatures that would reach them long before any cruiser group could. 2 days is 11 hours too late for those people, she said. "We don't have 2 days. We have what we have." I stood at the edge of the bridge, technically forbidden from the tactical planning that followed, and listened anyway, because nobody told me to leave, and I did not offer to go. What I heard over the next several hours reshaped something in how I understood this species entirely. They did not plan like people confident of victory. They planned like people entirely certain of the cost, doing the careful, unglamorous work of trying to make that cost as survivable as possible for as many people as they could manage. Lyndon ran 3 different firing patterns and threw out 2 of them for reasons that had nothing to do with maximizing enemy casualties, and everything to do with protecting the transport ship's flight paths. Cole argued for a formation that put the Ardent's own hull between the transports and the widest firing arc, a formation that meant they would take the first and heaviest hits themselves. Bellamy approved it without hesitation. I found myself doing something I had not expected. I found myself hoping. Not for my report, not for the data I had been sent to gather. I found myself hoping that these strange, loud, laughing, wounded, unbearably stubborn people would survive what they were about to walk into, and I did not examine too closely what that hope might mean for the professional distance I was supposed to maintain. That night, before the engagement, I found Grace Lyndon alone in the tactical bay, running simulations long after her shift should have ended, dark circles under her eyes and a mug of something cold and forgotten by her elbow. "You should rest," I said. She didn't look up. "I will," she said. "After." "After hasn't happened yet," I said, echoing Fenwick's words from days before without entirely meaning to. Lyndon's hands stilled on the console. For just a moment, something moved across her face that was not the flat competence she wore like armor during every waking hour I had observed her. It was there and gone before I could name it properly, but I recognized its shape well enough. It was grief, arriving early, for people who were not dead yet. She caught herself, straightened. The armor came back down like a visor closing. "Get some rest yourself," she said. "You're going to want to be sharp for tomorrow." I did not sleep that night. I don't think she did either. The convoy came into sensor range 6 hours later, 12 slow transports crawling through open space like a herd of grazing animals that had no idea a predator was already circling. The enemy fleet appeared 4 hours after that, a red wall of contacts blooming across the tactical display, more numerous than the reports had suggested, not 3-1, closer to 4-1, and every voice on the bridge went quiet when the true count settled onto the screen. Bellamy did not flinch. "Numbers changed," she said. "Plan doesn't. Lyndon, confirm formation." "Confirmed," Lyndon said, her voice steady in a way that cost her something. I could tell, because her knuckles had gone pale where they gripped the edge of her console. The Ardent surged forward, putting its own hull between the transports and the widest arc of incoming fire, exactly as Cole had argued for the night before. I watched from the observation deck, forehead pressed to the glass, and felt something in my chest that had no name in any language I knew. It was not quite fear. It was closer to the feeling of watching someone step deliberately into the path of a falling object to catch it, knowing the weight of it, choosing to hold their ground anyway. "Enemy fleet closing!" Lyndon called out. 90 seconds to firing range. "Comms. Open a channel to the convoy," Bellamy said. "Tell them to hold formation and keep their engines burning toward the relay point. Do not stop for anything. We will handle what's behind you." A young man at the comm station relayed the message, and I heard the tremor in the convoy captain's voice when it came back through the speakers, thanking them, apologizing for something that was not his fault, asking if they would make it. Bellamy answered that question herself, leaning toward the comm pickup, her voice dropping into something low and certain that I had not heard from her before. "We've got you," she said. "Just keep moving." I do not know if she believed it. I have thought about that a great deal since. I think the not knowing, and choosing to say it anyway, might be the truest thing I ever learned about this species. The first wave of enemy fighters broke off from the main fleet and came in fast, small and nimble, harder to track than the capital ships behind them. Lyndon's hands moved across her console in patterns too quick for me to follow, point defense guns swiveling and firing in short, precise bursts, and one by one, small red icons on the display blinked out. "3 fighters through the outer screen," she called, coming in on the transport's flank. "I've got them," said a new voice, and I turned to see a man I had not properly noticed before, strapped into a small side console near the rear of the bridge, hands on controls that I would later learn operated a squadron of short-range interceptor drones. His name, I learned that day, was Daniel Price, and he flew those drones the way some species breathe, without conscious thought getting in the way of instinct. He launched 3 drones in the time it took me to finish forming the thought that he had launched anything at all, and sent them screaming out toward the enemy fighters, bearing down on the convoy's flank. What followed was too fast for my eyes to properly resolve into individual moments. Flashes of light, a drone spiraling away trailing smoke, 2 enemy fighters gone in quick succession, and the third breaking off, damaged, limping back toward its own formation. "Got 2, lost 1 drone," Price reported, and there was no triumph in his voice, and no grief either, only the flat accounting of a person keeping score in a game where the stakes were measured in other people's lives. The main enemy fleet closed the distance, and the real fighting began. I will not pretend I understood the tactics of what followed. I understood only the shape of it, the way the Ardent placed itself again and again between danger and the ships it was trying to protect, taking hits that made the whole vessel groan and shudder, systems failing, and being brought back online by crews working in corridors. I could hear screaming with alarms even from the observation deck. "Hull integrity at 70%, someone reported. 62, someone else corrected, less than a minute later. Bellamy's voice never rose. She gave orders the way another person might read a grocery list, and somehow that steadiness moved through the ship like it was load-bearing, holding up every other person's nerve along with her own. "Transport 6 is falling behind," Lyndon said. "Losing engine power. They're not going to make the relay point at this speed." Bellamy looked at the display for exactly 1 second. "Cole, get engineering on a channel with Transport 6. See what we can do to boost their output remotely." "Already tried," came Henry Vance's voice from engineering, a man I had only spoken to once before, gruff and tired-sounding even in calm moments, and now stretched thin over something worse than exhaustion. "Their reactor's damaged. Best I can do buys them maybe 10 more minutes before it fails completely." 10 minutes isn't enough, Cole said. "Not at their current speed with 3 enemy cruisers bearing down on that side of the formation." I watched Bellamy's face during the silence that followed, and for the first time since I had come aboard the Ardent, I saw something crack through the calm she wore like a second skin. It was brief, a tightening at the corner of her mouth, a flicker in her eyes that might have been fear, or grief, or the particular exhaustion of a person who has run out of easy options and is about to choose between two hard ones. Then it was gone, and her voice came out level as ever. Price, get every drone we have left moving to cover Transport 6. Lyndon, redirect our forward batteries to thin out those cruisers before they reach engagement range. I want a corridor of clear space around that ship for as long as we can hold it open. That'll leave our own flank exposed, Lyndon said, not arguing, just stating the cost out loud so it could be counted. I know, Bellamy said. Do it anyway. They did it anyway. I watched the Ardent turn its guns away from its own defense and toward buying time for a single failing transport carrying people none of them had ever met and would likely never meet again, and something in me that had been standing at a careful, professional distance for days finally gave way entirely. I stopped being an observer in that moment. I do not know exactly when it happened, only that somewhere between Bellamy's order and the first shots that followed it, I had begun silently, uselessly, hopelessly rooting for every single person on that bridge to live. The enemy cruisers adjusted course, redirecting toward the Ardent's now exposed flank, exactly as Lyndon had warned they would. The ship shook under a hit that sent sparks raining from a conduit above the tactical station, and Lyndon didn't even flinch, just kept her hands moving across a console gone half dark, working blind through half her instruments to keep firing. Hull breach, Deck 4, someone reported. Fenwick's already moving crews down there. Transport 6 reactor holding, Vance called out, a note of something almost like hope threading through the exhaustion in his voice. They're through. They're clear. They made the relay point. For one single suspended second, nobody on the bridge spoke. Then Bellamy said, voice not quite steady this time, not quite the flat calm she'd worn all day. Good. Now let's get the rest of them through too. The battle did not end quickly, and I will not pretend every moment of it unfolded with the same clean clarity as those I have described. Much of it was noise and confusion, and the particular blur of time that comes when danger stretches on, long past the point where a mind can hold each second distinct from the last. I remember flashes, a cheer, quickly swallowed, when a second wave of enemy fighters broke off entirely, rather than press an attack that was costing them too much. Price's voice going tight and strange when he lost 2 more drones in the same engagement, and the way nobody had time to acknowledge it before the next crisis demanded their attention. Vance's voice cracking, just once, reporting a fire in the secondary reactor bay that took 11 minutes to bring under control. 11 minutes during which I stood on the observation deck with my hands pressed flat against the glass and understood, more completely than I ever had before, what it meant for a species to choose danger with open eyes. The enemy fleet broke off 2 hours after the engagement began, having lost more ships than they had likely expected to lose, against a single overmatched escort, and the convoy reached the relay point intact. All 12 transports. Every one of them. The Ardent limped alongside them, hull scarred, systems failing in a dozen small places that would take weeks to fully repair, and on the bridge, in the sudden quiet that followed the battle, nobody spoke for a long moment. Then Grace Lyndon laughed. It came out cracked and strange, more relief than humor, and she pressed the back of her wrist against her eyes for a second, before dropping her hand back to her console like nothing had happened. Bellamy looked around the bridge, at her exhausted, wounded, still-standing crew, and said the only thing I ever heard her say that sounded less like an order and more like a prayer. Good work, all of you. I climbed down from the observation deck that night on legs that had gone numb from standing too long in one position, and I found Ethan Cole in the corridor outside the bridge, leaning against the wall with his eyes closed, the first moment of stillness I had seen from him in nearly 9 hours. I asked him the question that had been building in me since the moment Bellamy had chosen to expose their own flank, rather than let one damaged transport fall behind. Was that the price you spoke of? I asked. The one that never stops costing anything. He opened his eyes and looked at me for a long moment before he answered. That was a cheap day, he said quietly. You should see what the expensive ones look like. I did not understand what he meant. I would understand very soon. 9 days later, The Ardent was ordered to a system I had never heard my own government mention, a quiet cluster of colony worlds called the Hollow Reach, and the moment the order came through, I noticed something change in the crew that I had not seen before. They stopped joking. Priya went quiet over her console in engineering. Fenwick spent an extra hour in the medical bay checking supplies that had already been checked twice that week. Price ran diagnostic after diagnostic on his drone squadron, long after the numbers had already come back clean. I asked Cole what the Hollow Reach meant, and he told me in 4 words that explained nothing and everything at once. That's where Harmon fell. I did not know who Harmon was. I would learn, slowly, over the following hours, that Harmon had been a sister ship to the Ardent, crewed by people some of this crew had trained beside, and that it had been lost in that system 18 months earlier defending the same 3 colony worlds we were now being sent to defend again. The enemy this time was not a raiding fleet or a scattered band of opportunists. It was a full invasion force, dozens of ships, moving with the coordinated precision of a military that had planned this campaign for a long time and intended to finish it. Bellamy read the tactical briefing twice, the same way she had before the convoy engagement, and this time, I watched her hand tighten around the edge of the console until her knuckles went white. "That's not a fight," Cole said quietly, standing at her shoulder. "That's a wall, Captain. We go in there, we don't come back out." "I know what it is," Bellamy said. "There are 3 other escort ships in range. We could combine forces, build a real defense instead of 3 ships joining us in 6 hours, Bellamy said. "The invasion force reaches the colonies in 4. We don't have 6 hours. We have 4, and we have what's docked in this bay right now." The bridge went very quiet. I stood at the edge of it, no longer pretending distance mattered, and watched every face I had come to recognize over the past weeks settle into the same tight, steady expression I had first mistaken for the absence of fear. I understood it differently now. It was not the absence of fear. It was fear, folded up small enough to carry, set aside, because there was work to do, and no time left to feel it properly. Bellamy turned to face her crew, and for the first time since I had come aboard, she did not give an order first. She spoke to them, plainly, without the flat command voice she usually wore. "I'm not going to tell you this is a fair fight," she said. "It isn't. I'm not going to tell you we're all walking away from it, because I don't know that, and I won't lie to you. What I will tell you is there are people on those 3 colonies who are not walking away from anything if we don't buy them time. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to buy them time. As much of it as we have in us to give." Nobody cheered. Nobody protested either, not after the first argument had already been made and answered. Grace Linden straightened at her console, jaw tight, and began running firing solutions with hands that did not shake. Whatever storm was happening behind her eyes kept carefully out of her fingers. I found myself standing beside her a moment later, though I had not consciously chosen to move. "You could refuse this," I said quietly. "It is not a mutiny to say a battle cannot be won." She did not look up from her work. "It's not about winning," she said. "It's about how many kids on those colonies get to grow up. That's the math I'm doing, not the other kind." I had no answer for that. I have never had an answer for that, not in all the time since. The Ardent reached the Hollow Reach with barely 3 hours to spare, and the invasion force came into view like a slow-moving storm front. Dozens of enemy ships arranged in a formation, built for one purpose only, breaking through anything placed in front of it. Bellamy positioned the Ardent directly in their path. "All hands, brace," she said, and her voice carried through every speaker on the ship, calm even now, even here. "This is going to be a long day. Do your jobs. Trust the person next to you to do theirs. That's how we get through this." The battle that followed does not live in my memory as a sequence of events. It lives as a series of ruptures, moments that tore through the ordinary flow of time and left scars behind that no amount of careful retelling has ever managed to smooth over. The first hour was almost mechanical in its brutality. Wave after wave of enemy fighters broke against the Ardent's defenses, and Price flew his drones with a precision that bordered on desperate, keeping the worst of the fire away from the colony's evacuation shuttles far behind our position. Linden's voice grew hoarse from calling out targeting solutions. Vance reported system failures faster than his engineering crews could patch them, and somewhere in the second hour, I heard something in his voice break entirely when he reported that the secondary reactor had gone critical, and he had no choice but to vent it before it took the whole ship with it. "We're losing power to half the ship," he said, breathless, and I could hear, even through the comm, the sound of people shouting behind him, the particular chaos of a crisis inside a larger crisis. "Do it," Bellamy said. "Vent it. I need my ship more than I need that reactor." The vent bought them time. It also meant the Ardent's shields, already strained past their design limits, began to fail in earnest. "Shields at 40%, Lyndon reported. 30. They're not going to hold much longer at this rate of fire." "Then hold as long as they hold," Bellamy said. "Keep the guns on that lead cruiser. If we can break its formation, the rest scatter." I do not know exactly when I stopped watching from the observation deck and started standing at the edge of the bridge itself, close enough to see the sweat on Lyndon's brow, close enough to hear Vance's ragged breathing through the comm, close enough that when the ship took a hit that threw half the bridge crew from their seats, I felt the deck buck beneath my own feet and had to grab the rail to keep from falling. "Direct hit, port side," someone called out, voice tight with pain. "We've lost the aft sensor array." "Casualties," Bellamy said, and for the first time in all the weeks I had known her, I heard something in her voice crack open, just slightly, just enough for me to hear the fear she had been carrying all this time, folded small, set aside, still there underneath everything. "Two down in the aft section," came the answer, grim and quiet. "Fenwick's on her way." "I don't have time to grieve that yet," Bellamy said, so quietly I do not think she meant it to be heard by anyone but herself. And then, louder, to the whole bridge, "Hold the line. We are not done." The lead enemy cruiser broke apart under a final concentrated barrage from the Ardent's forward batteries nearly 3 hours into the engagement, and just as Bellamy had predicted, the rest of the invasion force lost cohesion without it, breaking into smaller, less coordinated groups to finally begin to handle. It was not a clean victory. I want to be honest about that, because I have come to believe honesty is the only thing I owe this story. The Ardent limped out of that system with less than half its systems functioning, 2 crew members dead, 7 more wounded badly enough that Fenwick worked without rest for 11 straight hours to keep them alive, and every single person aboard changed in some way I could see clearly, but could not have named before that day. I found Grace Lyndon afterward, sitting alone in the tactical bay long after her shift should have ended, exactly as I had found her the night before the convoy battle weeks earlier. This time she was not running simulations. She was simply sitting, hands folded in her lap, staring at nothing at all. I sat down beside her without being invited, and for a long time neither of us said anything. Finally, she spoke, her voice very quiet. "We lost Marcus and Dana today," she said. "Marcus had a kid back home, 6 years old." I did not know what to say. I still do not know what I should have said. "I am sorry," I said finally, because it was true, and because I had nothing better to offer. She nodded, once, and wiped her face with the back of her hand, quick and rough, the way I had seen her do after the convoy battle, except this time the tears did not stop so easily. "After hasn't happened yet," she'd told me once. I understood now that after had finally arrived, and it was every bit as heavy as I had feared it would be, arriving all at once instead of in the careful pieces she had tried to defer it in. I stayed with her until she was ready to leave, and I did not write a single word of what I observed that night into any official report. Some things, I had come to understand, were not data. They were simply true, and belonged to the people who had lived them, and not to whoever might be watching. My posting aboard the Ardent ended 3 weeks later, when a courier vessel arrived to carry me home and collect the report my government had been waiting on since the day I first set foot aboard that ship. I stood on the boarding ramp with my bag in hand, and Bellamy came to see me off, which surprised me. Captains, I had learned, did not usually spare time for departing observers, whose only function had been to watch and record. She held out her hand, in the human gesture I had come to recognize as a mark of respect, and I took it, though the grip still felt strange to me, too firm, too warm. "Tell them the truth," she said, "whatever that ends up being for you. Don't soften it for us, and don't sharpen it either. Just tell them what you saw." I promised her I would. I have thought about that promise every day since, through the long transit home, through the weeks of drafting and redrafting a report that refused to take the shape my superiors expected of it. They wanted numbers, kill ratios, ship classes and weapon yields and doctrine notes they could feed into strategic models and use to calculate exactly how dangerous this species should be considered on some tidy scale, from negligible to catastrophic. I gave them numbers, because numbers were required, but I knew before I finished writing them that the numbers were the least true part of anything I had to say. What I wanted to tell them, what I am telling you now instead, because my superiors did not have the patience for it, and perhaps you will, is that humans do not fight the way any strategic model expects a rational species to fight. They do not calculate acceptable losses and retreat when the math turns against them. They calculate what a retreat would cost someone else, and they weigh that cost against their own survival, and more often than my own instincts could bear to watch, they choose the version of the equation that costs them more, so it costs someone else less. I watched a captain fly her ship directly into the path of an enemy formation to buy a stranger's convoy 10 more minutes of survival. I watched a tactical officer keep her hands steady on a console, while grief for 2 crewmates waited behind her eyes for permission it would not receive until the fighting stopped. I watched an engineer vent a failing reactor with his own hands, rather than risk losing the whole ship, knowing exactly what that choice would cost the ship's remaining power in the middle of the worst fight of his life. I watched a medic work 11 straight hours without rest, because stopping meant someone might not survive the waiting. None of that fits into a kill ratio. None of that explains itself to a strategic model, built to measure threat, as a function of firepower and fleet size. The thing that makes humans dangerous, the thing I could not make my own superiors understand, no matter how many drafts I wrote, is not the size of their weapons or the speed of their ships. It is that they have decided, somewhere collectively, without ever seeming to discuss it aloud, that the cost of stopping is always higher than the cost of continuing, so long as continuing means someone else gets to keep living. I do not know how to build a defense against a species that thinks that way. I told my superiors as much, in the plainest language I could manage, and I watched the recommendations sit in committee for months afterward, while officials who had never stood on that bridge argued over whether my assessment could possibly be accurate, or whether I had simply spent too long around humans and lost the clarity my post required of me. Perhaps they were right. I have turned that question over more times than I can count. But I remember Grace Linden's face the night after the Hollow Reach, and I remember Ethan Cole's voice telling me that easier and faster are not the same thing, and I remember Nora Bellamy setting down a cold cup of coffee, like a period at the end of a sentence, before she ordered her ship to turn toward danger instead of away from it, and I do not think clarity is the thing I lost aboard that ship. I think I gained something instead, something my training had never prepared me to hold, and it has made every report I have written since feel smaller and less true than the thing it was trying to describe. I was ordered to watch humans in battle. I did my duty. I filed my numbers and my ship classes and my doctrine notes, and somewhere in an archive on my homeworld, they sit exactly where such reports are meant to sit, filed, cataloged, forgotten by everyone except the analysts, who occasionally pull them up to argue about threat models in rooms I will never be invited into again. But I keep my own record too, the one I never submitted, the one made of small things that do not translate into strategic value. A stitched arm, a cold cup of coffee, a joke about nearly losing fingers, a captain's hand, warm and firm, telling me to tell the truth. I regret very little about my time aboard the Ardent, if I am honest with myself in the way Bellamy asked me to be. But I regret this. I regret that I went into that assignment looking for a weapon to measure, and I came home instead having watched a group of ordinary, frightened, exhausted people choose, again and again, without hesitation and without applause, to be braver than any doctrine could have required of them. I regret that I understand now exactly what my own people should fear about humans, and it is not their ships or their guns. It is that they will keep choosing the harder path, every single time, for people they have never met and will never meet, and there is no fleet in the galaxy large enough to make them stop. I was ordered to watch humans in battle. I watched, and somewhere in the watching, without ever meaning to, I stopped being afraid of them, and started being afraid for anyone who ever has to stand against them. That is the only report that ever felt complete to me. That is the one I choose to leave behind.